Hi, Ted. Tell us about some of the books you've written over the years. I know you've written many.
Well, yeah, I've lots of different subjects that sort of, connect to my interests. The first one was the Staten Island Ferry, and the city of New York wanted somebody to write about its ferry and one of the most famous ferries in the world. And so one morning I went on and was introduced to the captain and the pilot and some of the deckhands in the pilot house of the John F. Kennedy, which is still operating. This was 1986, but this boat's still operating now, all these years. I've lived in New York 1 year longer than the Kennedys has been in New York, which I always think is kind of fun. It's going to get retired soon, but who knows? Anyway, I walked into the pilot house and I was introduced, and then the captain of the ferry at that morning said, "What are you doing writing about the Staten Island Ferry? This is the most boring job in the world." And eventually, after he calmed down a little bit, because I think he was playing on a stage to all the men around, he was my best character. One of his favorite things to do was, sometimes when you were docking these ferries into slips, you have currents, running, past the slip, and you have tides, and sometimes what's way down below, it's 5 or 6 feet below the surface of the water, is running a different direction than the water that you see on top. So sometimes, you don't hit the slip just quite right, and you bang up against it, and people get jostled around and so on. And when it happens, just before all these guys are ready to get off and run for the subway, they turn up and they look at the captain. He had a Mickey Mouse hat on the floor, and he would put on a Mickey Mouse hat, and he would look down and he'd shout at them, "What do you want for a quarter, real, Captain?" So, after that, after he loosened up and told me stories like that, I said, this is going to be great. And he just said, "You come up here anytime you want to, and I want you to come overnight and spend the entire night with me on the night shift. So I want you here at 11 o'clock at night, and you can get off at 6 o'clock in the morning, but I want you to see what goes on this ferry."
Did you do it? Did you do it?
Yeah, I did twice.
What was that like?
It was spooky. For the first, the beginning, they locked themselves into the pilot houses at night.
Wow.
But then when they had to change ends, the captain would have the Staten Island end, was heading to Staten Island, and the deputy captain would do the other direction. But they would be in the same pilot house as soon as they could, with some of the deckhands outside, standing guard, because there were all sorts of things that went on, drug dealing and prostitution and all this kind of stuff. So,
when are you going to write that book?
No, I think I would. No, not after this one, because this was a celebration.
Yeah.
It was a celebration of the men and women that worked on the boats, and it was a celebration of the passengers, who were regular commuters and who took it just once in a while, and tourists that you meet. They'd always wanted to ride the Staten Island Ferry. It was so exciting, these great big boats going back and forth 24 hours a day. How many places have ferries that run all night long? And that was really really fun. It was just, I just loved doing it, And I met a woman, and I said, "Can I speak to you? I'm writing the book." She said, "Sure." And I said, you're going to Manhattan?" I said, "Yeah, once a year I go to Manhattan. I go to Macy's, go to Manhattan, come home with some presents for Christmas, and I never go back to to Manhattan again."
Once is enough.
Which is that Staten Island mentality amongst the older people.
Yeah.
And that there are lots of things like that. Sorry.
Well, thank you. That's a good one. So we're going to have part 2 with your next book.